And they've got this crosshair on some dude's head that's a mile away. And they go, boom. And then you just wait.
Takes a second.
Yeah, I think it takes 2 seconds.
Guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Pete. Recently, I was reloading for an upcoming long-range competition. I had a Rogan episode on in the background, and would you know it, they got into long-range shooting. Today, I'm gonna have a look at that discussion, give you guys some more technical information on some of the things they discussed, some of the things I think they got wrong. It's all for fun. Without further ado, let's get into this.
Have you ever seen those gun competitions?
No.
Well, they're fun to watch. See if you can find one of those where they run a course. So they time them, and and it's all about accuracy and speed.
Now that's very much the style of shooting we do, except we do them with sort of sniper bolt action rifles. We run around multiple different positions, super tight time limits, extremely small targets at different distances from about 400 to about 1200 yards. It is an incredibly good time with a rifle, and you learn a ton about shooting while competing in competitions like this.
That's what I'm saying. There's so many ways to kill somebody effectively.
Yeah. You just need a tarp and a shotgun.
Yeah.
And it's over.
And like the old days, the
Every
shooting
time.
squads, only one person would have live ammunition so that nobody felt the guilt. You'd have like 4 or 5 shooters, and they didn't tell you whose was the live round.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, this is how they got into it. They started speaking about firing squads and how one person would have live ammo. Now, I do believe this was the case. However, if you shoot a lot, like we shoot thousands of rounds every year, you will be able to very easily tell the difference whether your rifle was shooting live ammunition or pistol for that matter, just because of the difference in recoil impulse. If your handgun shoots a dummy round or a blank, as they call them, the recoil is very, very different, and you're going to be able to tell that almost instantly if you were actually the guy that fired the fatal shot. And now they transition into the long-range stuff.
I see some of these action movies, you see them kind of running around shooting at each other, and you go like, wait a minute, this guy was just on a rooftop with a sight and hitting somebody from 300 yards away, and now he can't hit him from, he's running down the street and they're missing each other with 20 shots.
A lot harder, though. A lot harder. Yeah.
I think a ton of us share that frustration in movies when the guys just can't hit each other in like semi-close quarter gunfights. It is very frustrating to watch because it's not that difficult.
A sniper shot is all just about not having any excess movement.
Now, this is 100% true for any type of long-range shooting. If you're shooting a 50-yard pistol shot, the slightest movement in the angle of that pistol is going to throw you off over distance. Now, amplify that by 300, 400, 1,000 yards. The slightest movement in your weapon platform gets amplified over distance. An object in motion stays in motion, and you end up missing extremely far to one side or up and down if there's a little bit of unnecessary movement in your system.
Right.
And controlling your breath.
Yeah.
Now, the breath thing is something people often get wrong. In video games, we've been taught you have a special button, the guy goes, and he holds his breath until you break your shot. That is the last thing you want to do. Your body runs on oxygen, your muscles need oxygen to work. What you want to do is time your shot to the bottom of your breath. So as you're exhaling, that's when you want to rip your shot. You do not want to hold your breath. Maybe you could do it for a second or so, but I highly advise not holding your breath. Practice to let out your shot at the bottom of that breath, because when you start holding your breath, bad things happen. You start shaking about. It's just a recipe for a disaster. So video games, please fix that going forward.
So when a sniper shoots, they're prone for the most part, meaning they're lying down. So you cut out all the movement.
Yeah.
Now, this is obviously dependent on the situation. A lot of times what we'll do, we'll be shooting from a tripod just to elevate you off the position. In the recent counter-sniper team with Trump, we saw the counter-snipers shoot from a tripod. It's not that hard to shoot from a tripod, especially if you practice a little bit. You can also get extremely stable shooting from a tripod.
Your shoulders rested. You ever seen like a sniper shoot? Their shoulders rested. You know, they have the stock pressed against their body, and all they're doing is controlling this finger and not flinching and controlling their breathing and keeping that.
This is 100% true. So you want to be as steady as possible. One of the things that Joe demonstrated there is his sort of trigger finger. What we try and do when we shoot, we try and pull backwards precisely with a 90-degree trigger finger, so it's hard for us to show you here, but we try and keep that trigger finger 90 degrees like that. You'll often see serious competition shooters run their thumb on the outside, and that just kind of helps that body mechanics to get that solid rearward trigger squeeze, again minimizing any influence just by pulling straight back through that trigger. It's going to deliver better rounds on target more repeatably.
A lot of these guys can shoot from a mile away now.
Insane.
A mile away.
And do they factor in gravity on the bullet?
Now, some interesting facts about a shot like this at a mile. If you're dialing in your scope, okay, at a mile, you need about 1,300 inches. That's about how much you're going to dial to offset that bullet drop, or in meters, about 33 meters. Now, recently we did a 4-kilometer shot, okay, or 2.5 mile shot. We had to dial 18,500 inches into our system. Now, it might surprise you, but you cannot dial this much into your optics. So we had a whole bunch of paraphernalia on the rifle with like optical prisms, mechanical devices to give us enough elevation in order to make that shot. In meters, it was 417 meters we had to aim above the target, and about another 45 meters for wind to actually lob our bullets in to hit 4 kilometers. It was an absolutely epic shot, and we have a whole video on the channel about that.
They factor in a bunch of different things. They a lot of times they're using apps. You can use an app, and you also...
So absolutely, there are plenty of apps you can use to calculate your ballistics. Now, you need a lot of information to do that, but it's really not that difficult. Gone are the days where you need to go make specific engagement at specific distances. Once you put in your ballistic information into your app, and we've done videos on how to do that on the channel, you can get pretty reliable data out to about 600-700 yards. That is when conditions also start playing a role, environmental factors, whether you're shooting high or low. Now, the next thing Joe gets into is apps for wind.
You use an app for the wind. So you want to know like which way the wind's blowing and where to hold.
This is something I disagree with a little bit. Maybe Joe just didn't clarify that. I also need to clarify at this point, I'm a massive Joe Rogan fan, okay? I have been for the longest time. I've learned so many great lessons from so many different people watching this show, and it's helped me a ton in my life. Now, what we do with the apps, right, for the wind specifically, there's a couple of things you need for the wind. Most importantly, or arguably as important as the direction of the wind, is the actual speed of the wind. So we'll use a device like this called a kestrel. Okay, you point this device into the wind. I attach a little ribbon on mine. It just gives you if the wind is blowing nicely or not nicely enough and you're not quite sure of the direction. The little ribbon gives you a good indication. I point my kestrel into the wind. I grab an average wind reading at my location. Now this is where it gets tricky, right? I'm measuring the wind speed where I am, but if I'm shooting at a mile, okay, or 1,000 yards, the wind speed over that distance is not going to be the same as it is here. However, where I'm standing, because again, getting back to our object in motion stays in motion, the wind speed at the shooter's location is going to play a large part of that total wind solution we need to calculate. So we're giving us the best possible chance of making the shot by getting accurate wind speed at my location. Now, the next thing we spoke about is the wind direction. If the wind direction changes slightly, that is going to have a big influence on how much wind we need to hold. So it's such a vital skill to learn how to read the wind, as we call it in long-range shooting, and that is something that you can really only do by shooting a ton. And that's why most of us serious shooters were shooting 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 rounds a year just to get familiar with our rifle, what our bullets are doing in the wind. It's extremely expensive to do that, but it's a ton of fun. And the beautiful thing about the sport, it can get so technical. The height your bullet is flying into, different types of wind, how the terrain affects the wind, all of these things makes long-range shooting so fascinating, and one of the reasons it really pulled me into the sport.
For the wind. So you want to know like which way the wind's blowing and where to hold.
Now, effectively what Joe means for the wind, what we're doing to offset the wind is if our target, let's say, is at 1,000 yards, I have a bit of wind coming from the left, I'm actually going to favor to the left side of that target. Now, depending on the wind speed and the wind direction, that's going to influence how much more to the left of that target I'm aiming, so that when my bullet is in flight, the wind will actually push it over the arc of the bullet and push it into my target. So that's effectively what we're trying to accomplish by holding wind.
You know, and then you have a scope that's dialed out, like it's zeroed out at a very specific yardage, whatever it is. So you can just put the crosshair wherever it is.
So yes, our scopes dial with turrets. Now you can dial your elevation, basically shifting your point of aim with your ballistic data that you now have from your app or a ballistic device. Now, oftentimes what snipers will use, and again, we saw this in the Trump assassination, the counter snipers were using a rail-mounted rangefinder on the top, something like this. They were actually using another unit, a military unit called the Raptor. This is the Vortex Impact 4000. This is a new unit that we've actually, it's the first time consumers can actually affordably buy something like this. It sits on the top of your rifle like that, and that's going to give me all of that ballistic information right here on that little screen at the back, because in a real world case scenario, you do not have time to go on a cell phone or all of those things. So this is everything's on your rifle. I have a little remote on the side. I hit the button. It gives me my firing solution. I can either dial that, or depending on what your crosshair looks like, you can also hold over that information. And then you can do the same thing for wind. In our 1,000-yard example, let's say I needed to hold 0.5 mil left to my target. I can either decide to hold that, because basically in my reticle, I've got all the same information that is on my turrets, or if I want to be super precise, I can just dial in those 0.5 clicks and I should be good to go.
A lot of times, if someone's hunting, they would do it like zeroed out at 100 yards. So it effectively would be up or down, maybe 4 inches and 300 yards. Or, wow. Yeah, so a really fast shooting, flat shooting rifle, you zero them out. So this guy's got to zero this thing out at how many thousand yards is a mile? So I've heard of guys shooting 1,500 yard shots.
Now this is where things get a little bit slippery, right? To shoot a human-sized target at 1,760 yards is a tall order, okay? If the conditions are absolutely perfect, there are so many factors as we discussed. You know, the spinning of your bullet, okay? The gravity of the earth, the spinning of the earth. Snipers and long-range shooters have to take all of these things into account. Just the spinning of your bullet in the air and the friction on the bullet will actually cause something called aerodynamic jump, which also you have to factor in. There are so many factors. So what I'm getting at is to put a first round hit on a target, you know, a human-sized target at that distance is exceptionally difficult, okay? It can be done. Again, getting back to our guy running in the streets or this shot, I would say it's easier to hit a guy running in the streets with a pistol at 25 to 30 yards than it is to get a first round hit at a mile. And keep in mind, this is something we do often at a competition setting when things are super relaxed. It's not a dynamic environment. We have a lot of time, and I know just how much all of us miss at a mile with our very first, what we call a cold bore shot. After that, it gets a little bit easier because you can take information on where you missed, apply that to your ballistic solution and make a follow-up shot. Then it's not as difficult, so the hit percentage on your follow-up shot goes up dramatically. But yeah, very difficult to put a first round hit at a target at a mile.
No shit.
Yeah, so there's so much equipment, and so it has to be.
I just love how fascinated Greg Fitzsimmons is with this whole discussion. It was freaking awesome to listen to.
It has to be so dialed in, and I mean they're sighting in these things on ranges, and it's so specific.
1,700, sorry.
1,700. Okay. That's so crazy. That's so far away. That's so far away. You could barely
see it. Yeah.
So they're looking through this insane scope on this rifle.
Yeah.
And they've got this crosshair on some dude's head that's a mile away. And they go, boom. And then you just wait.
Takes a second.
Yeah. I think it takes 2 seconds. Wow. How many seconds does it take for 300 Win Mag at 1,700 yards? A standard, like, high-powered rifle round that they would use. I don't know if that's what they would use for snipers.
So yeah, a lot of sniper platforms are using something like a 300 Win Mag, modern day 300 PRC, or a lot of them will also be shooting 338 Lapua Magnums. Now, to give you guys a little bit of perspective here, it'll take my bullet traveling at about 3,000 feet per second, or just under that, about 3 seconds to cover the distance to a mile. Now, what you have to keep in mind, and Joe will speak about this just now when people are shooting steel, is my bullet is going to take 3 seconds to get there. Keep in mind, the second my bullet leaves my muzzle, it's starting to bleed speed due to the aerodynamic forces impacted on the bullet.
Like those guys are the long range guys are very different than any other kind of shooter.
Yeah.
They're all about the science and the tech and all the stuff that's involved in getting the win. Like I have a buddy of mine who does long range shooting. He's not a tactical, he's just a gun enthusiast who likes long range shooting. He does competitions.
Yeah.
And they just shoot steel, and you hear boom, ding. It's like quite a long while afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, the reason it takes long for the sound to come back is because the bullet is traveling at about 3,000 feet per second. It's going to hit the target a few seconds. The sound wave that is generated from this target coming back to the shooter travels at a way slower speed, round about a third of the speed of the bullet to get back to the shooter. That's why there's that delay at 1,000 yards. You see the target impact, you wait for it, thunk, sound comes back, and every time I get it right, and we do it a lot, I still have a smile on my face. It's freaking awesome.
So like if you're shooting an animal and it's walking, it's super unethical.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what that thing's going to do. In the time between you shooting the gun and like with a bow and arrow, you never shoot at a walking animal.
Okay.
So I 100% agree with Joe on that, and I'm so glad he brought it up. I do not like shooting animals far, even if they are stationary. Just because at our long-range example now, at a mile, I don't think anybody's going out there shooting animals at a mile. But even at 1,000 meters, okay, which is a kilometer, my bullet is going to be in the air for about a second and a half. That gives the animal enough time to just turn its head like this, or get a fright for something in the grass, or just take one step forward while that bullet is in the air. You shoot it in the gut, then a couple of things happens. Finding that spot at 1,000 meters away from you is very tricky. Getting on the blood, the animal's probably long gone. It's just an unnecessary risk when it comes to hunting. I've personally had examples at about 300-400 yards where we shoot animals and they start moving while that bullet is in the air, or as you're committed to pulling that trigger, the animal does something unexpected. And I've seen it happen. I've got it on video. It's just one of those things that's going to happen the more you hunt. I shoot hundreds of animals every year, so it does happen to us. So again, more risk, unnecessary risk at increased distances when it comes to shooting animals. Now, I have shot animals on the move in the past. Usually when we're varmint hunting, whether we're shooting warthogs or baboons or something like that, we are shooting them on the move just because the target opportunities are few and far between, and you've got to have your wits about you. In a hunting scene, I have shot animals on the move that were either wounded from another hunter, and personally myself, I've also shot some animals when they're very close and they're still moving, because that bullet is effectively there instantly at something like 50 yards. So those are some shots that can be taken, but you have to be very, very selective on that. It was very interesting for me during this conversation to see just how much knowledge Joe had about the subject. And it's one of the things I admire about Joe. He's got a vast amount of knowledge about different kind of things. It was very, very insightful to listen to. And ultimately, Joe played a role in me starting to hunt because I found cam, I got into bow hunting. Predominantly, I do rifle hunting because this is kind of bread and butter. You know, I'm sponsored by rifle companies and all of these kind of things, and we make content with rifles. But I loved my bow hunt. It was by far the most connected I've ever felt to my hunt. So guys, with that said, if you learned something about long range shooting here, please like, comment, subscribe, all of those lovely stuff. We do educational videos, we do hunting films. I try and help you guys squeeze the most out of your equipment, and that's really the reason why I started this channel, just to share our knowledge, because we do shoot more than the average person can, and if you can learn from my mistakes, that's ultimately the goal of my channel. Thank you very much for watching. Joe, keep up the podcast if you somehow do see this. Yeah, love your work. Awesome. Guys, thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one. God bless you. Bye.